So our next session is examples of how better data can be used in practice. This session is going to be moderated by John Morrison, my CEO from the Institute for Human Rights and Business. John, over to you. And you'll have a poll coming up very soon.
I have a poll coming up. Should we look at the poll straight away, or I'll start talking and then go to the poll? Start talking. Good morning, everybody. How are we doing? Yeah? And to those of you online as well, it's wonderful to be back in Bangkok. I'm not sure how many of these global forums we've had now. If you include the virtual ones, it's probably about 8. Is it 8? Berlin, Bangkok, Singapore, New York, London, back to Bangkok, and then a couple of virtual ones during COVID. And, you know, there is progress. But as Mahendra said on the last panel, and I'm sure we're going to say on this panel, the progress has been in terms of people talking to each other, in getting the data together, maybe some laws, better corporate practice. Over 200 companies now have responsible recruitment policies, but the impact on the ground has hardly shifted at all. As Mahendra said in relation to the experiences in the GCC, but I'm getting old. I mean, the only thing that's changed the past 8 years is I'm now going grey, okay? And I'm also leaving IHRB later this year, so this is my last global forum as CEO of IHRB, and next year, I hope Randy Butler, the new CEO, will be sitting in this chair. But I hope I'll still be here, but maybe sort of making the coffee or something. And I'm proud that we have a community, and it's a community where migrant workers themselves and their organizations are taking more and more of the leadership now, which is also another dynamic that's shifted. But for God's sake, we've got to get to impact. We really do have to get to impact, right? And I do think the data question, the data technology, this idea, as Pam said on the last panel, this idea of what it would mean to have irrefutable evidence, not just of prevalence, but also of root causes, and also potential areas, new areas of intervention and leverage, whether that be at Davos, whether that be with the Thai government here, whether that be with the communities or in the boardrooms of companies. It's worth a go, right? And I do think that's why we've given it 3 panels at this forum to really see what you all think about this. It's not the only focus of this forum, but it's a big part of it. So as Dan said on the last panel, that was the panel on the why, and then we are the first panel that really tries to get into a bit of the how. And then there's a third panel this afternoon at 2 o'clock that Phil's moderating, which can get more into the technology side of things. But we are going to get into tech, you know, here. Phil, technologist and strategic advisor, one of the few people on the planet, I think, that actually understands the technology side and the forced labor migrant worker side as well. But there are others, but you are one of them. Welcome. Lisa Rand Taylor, co-founder of the ISRA Institute, probably needs no introduction. But there might be 1 or 2 people in the room that don't know you, but I doubt it. Lisa, welcome. Thank you for being here. And we should have Kirk online, Kirk Bresniker from the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise company as well. So we'll come to Kirk in a bit. Phil, why now? What is it about now that moves us to the how? Oh, that rhymes, by the way. How and
I just noticed that. It put me off slightly as it rhymed. Yeah.
I didn't mean to put you off.
No, I think, I mean, it's an important point. I mean, yes, I'm a technologist, and I tend to, I suppose, naturally gravitate to looking at what's changing in the technological field. But it's important to, I think, realize that by itself, no matter really how impressive the technology changes that we see are, actually by itself, technology doesn't do anything by itself. It doesn't have impact by itself. It's only when it's connected to people and organizations. That said, there have been a number of changes, I think, over the last, say, 4 or 5 years, which means that I think as a sector, there's now an opportunity to look carefully, strategically at how we take advantage of these. I guess there's three areas that I wanted to highlight. One is a general classification of tools called privacy preserving tools. Over the last 20 years, we've seen enormous advancements in technology, but really our ability to, as a sector, across all the different organization types, properly collaborate and share data has been quite poor. And there's some real important, valid reasons for that, including issues around privacy in government, things like protective markings, in corporates, issues around confidentiality. But there have been no end of new innovations and research to bridge this gap. And the technology there is looking rather impressive. The second one, I think, probably needs no introduction, which is artificial intelligence. And I'm sure most people are aware, of chatbots and so on and have used them perhaps. But in terms of how they can be used by organizations, there's been some significant work done and research done over the last few years to see how, for example, artificial intelligence can deal with some of the very messy data that actually exists in our sector. We don't have, unfortunately, sort of common standards across everything. A lot of our data does exist in text, right, in written down or in call transcripts, rather than nice structured columns in a spreadsheet. AI is very good at restructuring that type of data. And this is something which I think is important. It's also important, I think, is in terms of bridging the gaps between cultures, between languages as well, given the sort of very nature of being able to converse in different languages, reframe talking points from different people and organizations, make systems very personalized. And then I think the third area, which has been a big change, over the last few years, I'm sure we're all aware about the increasing legislation that's been that's added pressure to large companies to deal with forced labor in their supply chains. There's now an impressive array of legislation, and corporates are responding to that. They are releasing funds to try and look at that, to try and tackle that risk, sometimes corporate risk, I suppose. And what that's done is stimulate almost an economy of data aggregators. A lot of organizations now, particularly startups, AI companies, take vast quantities of data, including trade data and other risk data, and are able to then generate interesting risk profiles for them over their supply chains. And this kind of big data analysis, I think, is showing real promise. So those three technical areas, John, I would say are showing are things that weren't there a few years ago.
So as Mahendra was saying on the last panel, workers in construction sites at the GCC, they might not have gone to college, but they are data users themselves, right? And they're tech users. Are you saying that with generative AI, etc., if we get if we fix for the privacy concerns, that we can use that data in natural language? Data doesn't have to be put into spreadsheets. It can just be communications between people. That if it's done in the right way, we can begin to get intelligence from that. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, with a word of caution, because this is very new, right? And we need to test this properly. But the nature of forced labor varies hugely, doesn't it? Obviously, just in Thailand, it varies hugely, let alone other countries around the world. The way we even talk about forced labor is different in different countries. The legal aspects are different in different countries. So it's been extremely challenging. But yeah, I think the promise or the hope is that if we can find infrastructure to do this, we can, I think, connect the insights from people, from workers, who we heard from Mahindra earlier was extraordinary, right? And it changes very quickly with other organizations and perhaps close this information gap.
And as we heard from Pam on the last panel, that doesn't mean surrendering data data sovereignty, right? And then this concept of a federated data system, that's kind of been kicked to this panel to explain what do we mean by a federated data system.
Yeah. So there has been research done over the last several years on barriers to data sharing. I'd signpost some research done by the Alan Turing Institute in the UK, who spent a long time interviewing various stakeholders in different industries in the United Kingdom to basically find out what's caused this chilling effect on data sharing. Why are organizations reluctant to collaborate? The answer is it's very complicated. There are reasons to do with technology and cost. There are reasons to do with politics and competition and trust sometimes. But I think if we can find a way to flatten some of these power hierarchies, to put organizations in charge of their own data, perhaps to ensure that if impact is derived from that data and that collaboration, that it's properly attributed to those organizations, then yes, I think we've got now the technology to do that. But the question is sort of next steps.
So the data stays where it is, but it's interoperable somehow, right? There's a way that the data can be, or elements of it, there can be learning across data, but it's not about handing data over. Is that the right way of looking at it?
Yes, I think it's about providing infrastructure to organizations to be able to help others use that data in a way that keeps the control with that organization. Right. And indeed, not just the organization, but perhaps workers. So any frontline organization might be aware, that if you're collecting data about workers, there are ethics involved in that. There is safety involved in that. Right? These are real reasons why just handing over data is a massive problem and a barrier. So yes, I think these technologies can support and grease, if you like, grease the wheels on making that process.
And I know
better.
your panel this afternoon will go even deeper into this, but that's great. Right, Lisa, you have data, migrant voice. Tell us about why ISRA, how ISRA works. I mean, for those who don't know online, tell us a bit about ISRA, but then how has data been part of your story?
Thank you. I will, let's see, try to figure out how I can use this. I'm just going to show a couple of slides. There. Oh, sorry. Okay, there. So thank you. I'm Lisa. I'm going to take the perspective of somebody who I'm based here in Asia. I have been working, I run a nonprofit organization, an NGO. I am also a trained scientist technically, but I will give you a little bit more of the ground perspective. So I run an organization called ISRA Institute. It's sort of like an organization that works in the region, but then we have a lot of great partnerships. That's a big part of what we do with NGOs and trade unions. And I'm going to talk about why that's important, especially for responsible recruitment. I'm going to bring that back, but also with brands and retailers. So just as a kind of a snapshot to talk about the data, what is the reach and impact? So our organization has been around 10 years. So an NGO operating in South and Southeast Asia for 10 years. Just in the past 3 years, what kind of data do we get? There's 15 million people in forced labor in Asia. Thank you for Walk Free and others who are kind of contributing this kind of information. We run worker voice channels. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but essentially in the past 3 years, we've gotten between, it goes up and down, but between 10 and 20,000 calls and messages from workers and survivors per month. So in the past 3 years, that's over 422,000 calls and messages to independent worker voice channels. So that's not just our hotline. Sometimes we just sort of think about 24-hour hotlines, but that could be Viber, Line, Facebook Messenger. It's evolved over time. We have to sort of meet migrant workers where they're at. A lot of young workers are not so keen on like calling and talking on a phone, probably just like many of our children don't want to call us and talk on the phone. There's a lot of messaging, so there is a need to evolve. And this also involves a lot of really great NGOs and trade unions in origins and destination who are running these channels as well. We all are NGOs together. we have identified and helped with the assistance of the remediation of over 282,000 cases of worker-reported labor abuses. The great majority of this is in supply chains because we happen to focus on supply chains, but there is some of this which has to do with, migration to like into construction and domestic servitude and things like that. So the data is significant, but I think one of the reasons why I want to argue, how do we have so much data, which is a strong signal? It is detecting thousands and thousands of cases of labor abuses, some which amount to forced labor. For those of us who are forced labor experts, we know how to look for the indicators of forced labor and human trafficking or whatever, but it's because the purpose of all of us NGOs and trade unions is to detect and drive the remediation of these issues. So if you are there because you're there no matter what, if the businesses are there or not, the NGOs, the trade unions are there. We have a duty to serve, and running hotlines and so on. You hear from workers about the issues that they're facing and ways that basically we can all work together. We have a commitment to the remediation and justice of these issues. So for us, one of the things that ITSR brings in is partnerships. So at the top, these are a number of NGOs and trade unions in different parts of South and Southeast Asia. And in the bottom part are brands and retailers who basically say, oh, okay, well, if you can help me understand what's happening in my supply chain, we're going to do different things. And different businesses are in different places. Some, if they see that there's issues in their supply chain or with certain suppliers, they'll say, oh, okay, I'm going to keep an eye on it. Let's see if there is some movement towards improvement. If there is, great. If not, I'll step in. Some are very proactive and able to sort of jump in if necessary. Some don't need to because just their presence is a bit of a motivator for suppliers or recruitment agencies to really drive change. So this is an interesting thing about who owns the data and how do we get it all to talk to each other. One of the challenges that we faced initially basically an organization that our systems run in English, but we do a lot of work initially in Thai with Thai businesses. The workers were Burmese, Cambodian, Thai, and Lao. So what do you do? How do you do with all that data? We basically built a system for ourselves in all of our languages. Many years later, and through work with Tech Against Trafficking, we were able to get to the support to say, well, if we have this system, which we call inclusive labor monitoring, where when we all log cases, you could be a Nepali NGO in Madesh, or you could be a Burmese NGO in southern Thailand. You can log in Nepali, you can log in Burmese, and you can log what happened with the call. It essentially creates structured data on the back end where we're all using the same definitions of the indicators of labor exploitation and forced labor, right? And I want to raise that because I want to talk a little bit about inclusion and sustainability. Some of you may have been on the ground almost as long as me, and every 5 or 10 years, tech people come. Sometimes it's very exciting tech people then, and they've got the solution for us, guys. We're all mired in forced labor every day, and we have to drive impact. And for those of us on the ground, we're like, okay, could this really be the thing? Could this be the thing to help us unify? Because if you're just running an NGO, it is hard to do things like to say, well, gosh, we're trying to drive change in Malaysia, but these really awesome NGOs that are hearing about the first mile risks are basically kind of, writing case notes in Maithili. It's not even Nepali, and we're here operating in English, working in Malaysia. How do we do these sorts of things? If there are solutions to how we can all work together that go beyond all of us having to be in the same system, that sounds great, but I would love for us to think about inclusion. When we talk about what data sources, what is our source of truth? What are our many sources of truth about forced labor? I would love to invite us all to ask ourselves again, wait a second, where is forced labor? And who is working on forced labor? Who is in forced labor? What is the quality of the data? And so what I made here is, it's a bit of a kind of a weird sort of pie chart thing. But essentially I'm saying, okay, so what is represented here is kind of like a theoretical federated data ecosystem, right? So you've got all these folks, we're the purple folks, those of us who are kind of collecting different kinds of data on maybe lots of things, but maybe included in there is forced labor. It goes into some sort of data service that smart people are going to help build for us and for others, and we're excited about it, and then there's data consumers on the other side, they're going to do something about it. So just say you are, I don't actually know how to point this thing. Just say you are an awesome NGO in rural Nepal where there's a lot of workers that are going out and you're getting all this sort of data. This doesn't point. Little tiny purple, dark purple one. You have all this amazing data where your data set is small. It's like a small circle, but the vast majority is high quality data about exactly what's happening. It's dark purple. Your data is unstructured and it's in your local language. At the same time, you may see, I'll just talk about an example of a big light pink one. It's a weak forced labor signal, or actually, let's even talk about a big gray one with a little slice of light pink.
What kind of data would that be then?
So it could be like, so for example, social audit data. So, I mean, just to kind of say, if you work in supply chains, if you work in a factory, it's very common for us to hear about all different kinds of worker reported labor abuses, and the factory just cleared a bunch of social audits. So we know that social audits are not detecting a lot of data about forced labor. And so there's a lot of gray there that says, okay, well, there's a lot of data that's really actually not relevant, but then they might have some data that is relevant to labor issues, but maybe it's a weak signal of forced labor. It would be great for all of us to stop having to argue about whose data is better or worse or whatever, and instead come up with a system where we can understand and weight and have rules about the qualities of the signal, but the tools that it takes to essentially figure out, well, how do you get whatever goodness and relevance is out of like social audit data is very different than the tools that would be built, for example, some of the AI things, to be kind of reaching out to and inclusive of migrant worker groups or like locally based NGOs in origin countries that are getting information about the realities of forced labor, particularly forced labor and exploitative recruitment and otherwise. So, I mean, I kind of want to just sort of throw that out about when we think about inclusion, when we think about sustainability, and when we think about building systems, it would also be great, the second thing is to make sure we're not building a system that's basically like a parking lot and wanting all of us to kind of park our data there and then you get a number. I would love for us to talk about what is this thing going to look like in 5 years? And how is it going to drive change? What are the different purposes? And so there's a lot, I think, that it would be really great to hear from a lot of different stakeholders about this and not for us to share like what we see as the solutions. That can maybe start off a conversation, but it definitely shouldn't be the
So we very much hope that today, tomorrow, the rest of this week, we can hear some of these. So dynamic. So I'm beginning to learn now that this federated data model has to be dynamic. What in terms of migrant organizations and migrants, you've talked about them as a source of high quality data, but what about as data consumers? What is in it for migrants themselves to be part of this federated?
That is a question you should ask to migrant workers, I would have to say, and they are here. So I hope that at the point when we have an ability to have a conversation, I can speak as an NGO, and we do work directly, of course, with workers and survivors. But yes, we are, I guess you would say, data sources, but of course data consumers. We use the data every day. And it's not about like, where's the forced labor? I mean, the direction and pace of change is very important, not just to us, but we work with corporates as well. So, you know, when you see like, oh gosh, there's like all this forced labor everywhere, there's all this labor risk. I mean, one thing that businesses often ask us is like, oh, well, you know, is it getting better or is it getting worse, right? And workers will report the same thing too. Okay, so, you know, the situation here is not great, but I can see that it is getting better. We are getting, you know, compensations back into our paycheck every 2 weeks. So things are starting here, but they are getting better. Direction and pace of change matters. It is actually something that can also be incentivized. So when we talk about businesses buying into this, I would love to see not just like pitch money into the kitty to make sure that all of these great, you know, NGOs and worker organizations can contribute to this and be enabled and empowered to contribute, but also what are businesses going to do when they see a bunch of data and they can see, oh, you know, like some suppliers are doing a great job and some suppliers are not. Are they actually going to hinge their buying on human rights data? Because that's not happening an awful lot at this point.
Can I, last question to you, Lisa. You've talked about the limitations of existing social audit data, right? Could federating social audit data into this other data, this wider data pool, make social audits better?
Well, we'll have to see. So, I mean, I think that we need to be able to have, I guess, tools and rules and inclusion to be able to talk about what we're finding. I don't think any of us have done this yet, so we don't know what we're going to
So
find.
a lot of the
But
corporates you work with do both, right? They do social
of
auditing, but
course,
they work with you on
everyone
remedy
does
and
social
worker
audits.
voice. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And so, I mean, if we have any brands and retailers who have the clearance to be able to say what it really kind of looks like for them, I'd be surprised. But it's always great. But I mean, we all talk with businesses in closed doors, and they know, when they are confronted, like if they log into our system and they see, oh gosh, this one supplier site has a whole bunch of different issues, but I can't believe it. They just passed a fill in the blank audit. They just passed a fill in the blank audit. And so I think if we have a way to say, this is not unexpected, because workers will call NGOs that they trust because they want to get help with something, rather than a social audit is done by a stranger who comes in and goes out. I mean, it's kind of a lot to expect of a stranger to be able to derive that kind of information from vulnerable people. It's a great tool for a lot of things, but I think for forced labor, I think a lot of us are kind of acknowledging that maybe it's not the best tool for this.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to come to Kirk in a second, but Phil, Lisa's point about where this could be in 5 years. I mean, we talked, David and the last panel talked about the fact we need to develop a proof of concept in terms of it. But, what is the vision of where this could be in 5 years' time?
Well,
How ambitious are you?
yeah, I mean, as was implied earlier by Lisa and others, it's not up to me to say to anyone, this is how it's going to be. It's really up to me. I get nervous even being on a panel, frankly, trying to sort of
They're nice,
imagine what this. Yeah,
they're smiling, so I wouldn't be nervous.
the key thing is that this has got to be co-developed by partnerships, which is why I think as many voices in the room as possible to talk about what works is important. When I have listened to different groups, big and small, they talk about issues to do with equity between organizations, but also between countries, and the power hierarchies between this as barriers to tackling forced labor. They talk also about not just the impressive tech and AI, but also, we kind of need some laptops and some decent kit on the ground as well. So there's equity in IT as well. So I guess when I sort of think about 5 years, I guess from what I'm hearing, it's not a sort of centrally kind of heavily centralized designed infrastructure. It is a shared capability in which organizations can use to bridge the barriers of access to IT, of being able to contribute as well as derive value from this infrastructure. But if we're just doing the same as we did 5 years ago or 10 years ago, then we're not actually going to change exploitation and forced labor, because it's getting worse. So we're going to have to try and find ways to use this opportunity, I think, to challenge ourselves, to say, actually, what do we need to change, right? What is, whether it's a corporate, government, non-profit, whatever, how do we bend what we're doing to be more impactful, particularly from a prevention perspective? And there are tensions, right? We live in a system. Corporates do what they do because they're responding to risk. They're like organisms. They respond to risk. They respond to changes in their competitive landscape. They are trying to survive, right? They are like organisms. There's no point, to say, oh, that organization is bad, because if they weren't there, another one would fill their place. So how do we then bend this as a system perspective towards tackling humanitarian issues? I don't have the answers today on this, but I think together, actually, I think we can start looking at this. Certainly the tech offers new opportunity for this. But yeah, I mean, we've got to be ambitious, because otherwise, why are we here?
This is a great segue into Kirk. Kirk, if you're still with us, just while I come to you, there's others in the room that have good data. I mean, ILO, IOM, Verite, and others are all here, recognizing many of your organizations have data. So do, either through questions or just through the next 2 days, please be part of this conversation. This is just really to kickstart us. Kirk, you've just been listening in. Back to you as HPE, you're somebody that understands technology. I'd just love you to react to what you're hearing, and how transformative do you think this triangulation of data could be? based on other examples, other experiences you've had?
Yeah, thanks, John. I think that there's tremendous potential. Want to remind everyone, we've now reached a position as a species where we can take every single byte we've ever recorded and compile them into a single predictive model, a single generative AI model. So there is no upper limit. As a matter of fact, we need so much data to continue to improve the models, we're having to synthesize it. So we should be audacious in thinking about the amount of data that we can bring into analysis and yield important results. But we also want to remind ourselves, and I think this goes to both what John and what Lisa were saying, when we think of challenging problems in engineering, one of the open source model credos is given enough eyes, all bugs are shallow. If there's enough observability and we can bring reasoning into reason over the data, we'll have fantastic results. And I think that's where we want to understand holistically. It's not just that we can create a model that can consume every byte, but the question is, how do we admit that data in? I think, John, that goes to the point, or Phil, that you were just raising. Sometimes it's not having a supercomputer in a data center that matters. It's having readily available and reliable basic IT in the hands of people who are at the front lines, or in a way that is accessible by the migrant who is under stress. And so, first, that question: how do we admit all that data? And data can be held out of our reasoning because of physics. It can be held out because of economics. It can be held out because of law. And that's where the research we do at Hewlett Packard Labs is understanding how do we solve for that triple for physics, economics, and law to admit as much data as is necessary. How do we reason over it to generate insight in a time that still matters? Because many of these are human bound, time bound, very challenging situations, and a perfect answer in a couple months might be absolutely not acceptable. And finally, how do we turn that insight into action at scale? And that means understanding how to take an insight and very quickly across the range of human languages, across all of the social systems that are being utilized both by the migrants as well as those who would look to exploit them. How do we understand how to bring these systems together? So I take great inspiration in the conversations we've had in things like deep medical research for very complex problems like working with the German National Center for Neurodegenerative Disease Research on their Alzheimer's research. 30,000 individuals, 30 years worth of data being collected, a million years worth of health data to try and find the hidden causes of Alzheimer's. And it will be an interstitial problem. It'll be an interdisciplinary problem. It will be a messy problem where we can never tell which byte was the last one we needed to have that full insight into a very complex situation. And here we think about this. This isn't just one disease. This isn't just one adversary. And it is an adversary, a group of adversaries that are actively looking to find those interstitial places in which to continue to perpetrate crime. So I think that when we think about these things, I want to first always listen and then remind the people that we have on the ground what we are capable of, or perhaps even raise the aspirations of whether it is how do we cost effectively admit all that data without ever having to translate it out of its native language, leave it unstructured, just collect it with the metadata, and let's use the power of these models in order to find those correlations. But I think, and this comes back to the question, what does this platform to me look like in 5 years? To me, it looks like a platform. It looks like a platform for exploratory science, for researchers and social scientists who are at the cutting edge, who are the feet on the ground, to say, I wonder if, and to be able to talk with their colleagues, to be able to look over data that is demonstrably secure, demonstrably private, that it is not a way in which we will surveil people who are already under stress, but to understand how we provide them the guarantees necessary for everyone to opt in, whether that is an individual in flight, whether that is an NGO, or it is a company like our own, a global multinational. Everyone opting in because they understand the protections afforded to their data, and they can look at the demonstrations of truth from the outcomes.
So just to check in with you, Kirk, you are telling us that the concerns that we might have around privacy and the vulnerability of the workers who are sharing data, those can be fixed through technology itself. Technology can provide privacy. Just checking, you're telling us that
Yeah.
that will be possible. Yeah.
I'll give you a quick example. A couple of years ago, I was up at the Presidio at a nice World Economic Forum event, and we had a media reporting company that was actively soliciting in migrant populations in the U.S. Don't you want to see yourselves represented in big Hollywood media? Doesn't it feel good to have your stories told? And these individuals were reluctant, let's say that, to share that data. And the individual who was collecting it, they couldn't. Why won't they trust me? And I'm like, why should they? They don't need trust. What they need is proof. Proof that information that they give you cannot be used in order to surveil
So
or
we'll have to,
persecute them.
that will have to
We,
that will have to be part of the story, won't it? That it's
yeah,
not only is the data irrefutable, but the fact that people will not be harmed by the aggregation of data is also irrefutable and
that
demonstrable.
cannot be
Lisa,
harmed. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So Lisa, you wanted to come back in.
Yeah, just to make sure that as we're sort of building for the future, we are learning from failures of the past. And, when there are a couple of instances that come to mind about, oh, we're going to build this great, data system, this great, regional hotline or whatever. We're going to ensure that everyone has access and, you can do this and you can do that. Those things do not succeed if the system doesn't always work towards the purpose of whoever is putting in. You cannot ask NGOs and workers to say, put your data in. I made it really easy. I made an API for you. I did this for you. I did that for you. And then if you do that, all these, leaders or businesses or others can somehow maybe eventually be compelled to do something good. There have been very specific instances of things like that. Certainly I can think of a couple in Southeast Asia over the past, 15, 20 years. And those things fail when they do not address, basically, those of us who have data are just like, why should we? Why should we do that? Because okay, it would take extra time for people to do XYZ of whatever you need. And I don't have money for a program officer to be able to do that or whatever. So this time around, we just have to make sure that we are very pragmatic about it. And especially, I think we all understand that the world now is a little bit different than it was a couple of years ago. To be able to say, okay, it's very different if you say, let's say, I have $100,000 to build this system. What should be the priorities? What should be the first, second, third kind of tiers of who we bring in and how we do it, the data? And then how is the system going to work for them, whatever their objectives are? That is a different story than I have $5 million or I have $2 million or whatever it is. So sometimes you have to kind of be upfront and pragmatic because, again, for those of us who are running kind of local NGOs and trade unions, it's a tight time. It's tight for our time. It's difficult for migrant workers. You have different recruitment channels that are closing, opening. People are migrating out of desperation. There's wars that, everyone kind of knows what's going on, in this region. When it's a very, very difficult time, we have got to be able to make the argument to say, this is how it is going to make your life better and the life of the people you serve or your families or whatever.
Pathway to impact. Also, it has to be super clear. Do you want to say something?
And aligned purpose.
Yeah, and aligned purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the business model for any technology that's going to be useful. It's got to be genuinely useful for the organizations. Useful has got to derive value because there are realities around, particularly now, as you just said, around spare cash to do things. It is hard, super hard. So it does have to have that. A friend of mine in India, she said to me, don't build technology that's ornamental, which kind of hurt. I felt seen when she said that. But it's true, right? We can't let PR trump the realities of needing impact. And if we need impact, it's got to be genuinely useful for organizations of all types, right? And we heard particularly the crucial data comes from on the ground. And if we can't get that information and make that equitable, that relationship, then we're not going to be successful. But that's why we need all the voices in the room.
I quite like ornamental technology. This lovely little
Still makes me sweat when I hear this
phone
conversation. Yeah.
Anyway, we have a poll fresh in the results of the poll that you've all done online and in the room. Should we just show the results of that on the screen? We asked how data can, now, but on this word data, by the way, you probably already noticed there are 3 pronunciations of the word, D-A-T-A. There's data, data, and data, right? All of those are acceptable.
And data.
And data, there's data, which is somewhere in between the data and the data. They're like 4 then. Let's unite around the fact that all pronunciations are of equal virtue. And if I sound very English when I go data, you know, that is not necessarily the best way of pronouncing it at all. But so it doesn't matter how you pronounce it. But anyway, how data can be better used in practice. Now, whether you're a business, civil society organization, government, or international body, how confident are you in your organization's use of data and technology to support the responsible recruitment of migrant workers? So this is your confidence in your own organization. And I guess 31% feel very, very confident, somewhat confident, 27%. We are beginning to explore the possibilities, 37%. Currently not looking at this in any depth, 2%. Or maybe I'm reading the wrong, no, that's right. And then not collecting or reviewing any data, no, or is that 2% as well? They're both 2%, aren't they? So only 2% of those of you here or online are not engaged in this question. That's quite staggering. Maybe it's self-selecting. You wouldn't be at the forum this year if you weren't interested in data, because but I don't know if it's circular or not, but it's, what do we make of this? Kirk, when you see these figures, you must be overjoyed as a technologist that our little world of forced labor and responsible recruitment needs your help.
Well, certainly, you know, I think I'm just thinking, where would I place us? And the challenge is we have
I hope very confident at HP.
I'm very confident that that data can be used, but the question is, how do we get to all of it? How do we recursively search down these very complex supply chains to get all the way down to the minerals? And that is a challenge. And understanding how we use that to shape our organization. You know, I think you had my colleague Pam on the earlier session. I have a lot of confidence in Pam. What I don't have necessarily is the same level of confidence that she has always afforded all the data necessary to make those arguments to our leadership team.
That's a very good distinction. I hope Pam heard that as well. We're going to let you guys have the last word, each of you, but we do have some questions that Thithi is going to read out, and then you can choose in your final remarks to respond to some of the questions. We'll take them as a bunch. Questions so far, a little selection of them. Thithi, floor's yours.
Thank you, John. We have questions coming in, and I think I'll just read the first one, which is, if an organization has data to share, how should they organize it? What kind of data should we be collecting? And I think Kirk has already written down the answers, but I'd like to invite you to answer them if that's possible.
Are there more questions? Give all the questions once.
Sure. Okay. So we also have 3 more. The second one is, culture will eat data for breakfast. How do we take culture into account in data collection and in implication for action? We also have the third question. How can we collect data from migrant workers sending country? Awareness of forced labor should be built after migrant workers decide to work abroad. And the last one, how do we make sure that we are not fixated on collecting and reporting data for data's sake?
Okay, very good question, that one, yes. And I like the one about culture eating data for breakfast, or breakfast eating culture for whatever, which way around it is. But we'll start with you, Kirk, and then we'll come to Lisa, and then we'll finish with Phil. Kirk, there was the first of those questions, I think, directly sent to you, but do you want to respond to any of that, or any final remarks?
So I think, again, I want us to be unabashedly asking for all of you who have this data, or those of you who have a hypothesis. You know, one of the things that has been challenging sometimes is to, if you have, even if you have been, working these problems for a while, the new capacities that are coming online to deal with unstructured data, to deal across languages, are nothing short of science fiction. And so I guess I would want everyone here to raise your aspirations and unabashedly ask for, can I do this? I've always wanted to do this. I have a theory. I have a hunch. I think I'm onto something. If only I could. When we were working with the Alzheimer's researchers, they said, well, because it's impossible to hold a human genome in a computer memory, or even infeasible. And I said, well, I just made a prototype that holds 80,000. So you're only 80,000 times off of your assumption on our ability to analyze information. I think there are similar kinds of, I just want us to all sort of put aside, suspend disbelief, and ask the question that you want to ask. Ask for the data that you want to have, and then let us partner with you on how we can try and achieve that.
Well, that's very stimulating. So we want data that will lead to the abolition of forced labor in the next 5 years, and for responsible recruitment to become the norm globally, right? I mean, will we?
Yeah. So I think as a practitioner, we typically start with where's the problem? Where is the forced labor? So, I mean, if we are talking about, and I love the other question about, how do we understand what's happening in origin countries? Because so much is happening well before the contract is being signed for workers going overseas in some of these kind of high-risk recruitment corridors. Where is the forced labor and who is working on these issues? Where are the workers and how is anyone communicating with them? When we think about data, just to sort of think about forced labor, if you're working on forced labor, there's some talk about like, how do we collect data? Like, how do we go around? How do we do a study or whatever? Maybe think about it, because we have to kind of get to brass tacks and get moving pretty quickly. Think about who is already working on this every day? Who has, like, where's the real-time view? It's not like, so like studies, audits, things like that, those are point in time. Like, you go and you do some sort of study, you get the information, and then it's kind of outdated, it's point in time. There is value to it. Let's build it in if we've got like the time and resources. But there is real-time data and insights that are coming from the people that are impacted and those that are serving them, like every day, every hour. If you look into our system, for example, and that's just one of many, like things change every day, scores change every day. If you're talking with, an NGO in Myanmar, the risks and the possibilities for aspiring migrants, it changes like, every day, every week. And so maybe we should think about, again, inclusion. Where is the forced labor? What do we want to deal with? So who has the data? And then how do we sort of build a system around that? And then maybe kind of go from there, but maybe have as the priority, like the addressing and empowering people who are working on the ground every day on forced labor and those who are impacted. We can build tools for like whatever is out there, then like build tools for workers and build tools for the people who serve them first.
Well said. Phil, last word.
Yes, so quick fire answers to some of the questions that came, which were excellent, by the way, thank you. Organizing data in our organization, first of all, make sure you're organizing it to do what you need it to do locally. Be aware of data standards that do exist, things like the ILO indicators, be wary of those. They can help organizations, but also help share data as well. But tech is coming to help transform data into different formats and so on. The question about culture is super important. It's easy for a technologist to say AI will solve that. It won't. What it can do, though, is bridge some of the gaps and I think enable people from different cultures and language actually to help program these systems using natural language. We don't have time to go into that into detail, but that's a nuance, I think, which is going to be helpful to us. Collecting data for data's sake, I also sort of term that as extractive, which can be extremely harmful, which is why sometimes let's pivot back to looking at why we need data first before we just collect it for the sake of it. I agree.
Well, thank you very much to Kirk, Lita, and Phil. Maybe we can show that in the usual way. Thanks for the questions online as well. There will be a third panel on this theme after lunch. going even deeper into the technology aspects. But we thought we would sort of move it around a bit. And back to Neil to tell us what's next.
Thank you very much, John. John worries about his greying hair. I've lost all mine, so I think that shows you which one of us has been putting the real shift in. But John, thanks for that, and thanks for a great panel. It's time for a coffee break. We make a point of having extended breaks because we know how important networking is to everyone, and you've just found that person you're dying to speak to, and then it's time to come back into the room. So we do have a half-hour coffee break. Hopefully that's time for you to at least begin those chats, but we do ask you to try and come back into the room by 11:30 sharp so that we can start the next session, because the online audience will be waiting and we'll be starting the session directly on time. Anyone who's struggling to ask questions, you do need to do it via the Zoom app. So you need to make sure that you go to the QR code, make sure that you've downloaded the Zoom app, and that's where you, as an in-person audience, can ask questions of the panelists as well. Thank you. We'll reconvene at 11:30. Thank you all very much.